everyone, Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back to the Aquatic Industry Insider. This is a weekly video roundup of the top news articles that we've shared on our Facebook page and my analysis of why they're really important or interesting to what's going on in our industry. So this week we have 6 articles. We're covering the week of July 3rd to July 9th. All of the articles will be posted in the box below. You can also search them on our Facebook page, Lakeview Aquatic Consultants, and they will also come up as posted during the week of July 3rd to July 9th, 2022. So let's jump into it. First article I want to share is a great feature from National Geographic magazine. It's entitled, "The Search for Lost Slave Ships Led This Diver on an Extraordinary Journey." Explorer Tara Roberts took up diving to learn about the human side of a tragic era. She wound up connecting with her family's inspiring past. This was originally published on February 7th, 2022. I didn't actually get connected to this article until July. There's also a wonderful short podcast series that you can download, 6 episodes that covers a lot of the same material that is included in this article. And the thing that really drew me into this article was really just the premise. So I completed my PADI scuba certification a few years ago. I didn't particularly love it. I've loved swimming my entire life. I thought I was going to love scuba and I didn't. But I do see a lot of value in naval archaeology, underwater research. And this journalist got connected to a group in the United States called Diving with a Purpose. And their focus is going and mapping out the archaeological remains of slave ships that sunk in the Atlantic during the slave trade from Africa to the Americas. And it's really powerful work, obviously. And this journalist, she talks about her personal experience as a Black person who became certified in order to assist with this project. A lot of different things that she talks about in this article in terms of her personal experience, as well as going through and talking about different groups that she didn't realize existed. So for example, the National Association of Black Scuba Divers, an old organization that's long represented the interests of Black divers in a sport, in a hobby that's often primarily represented by white scuba divers. So this was not so much a pool article, but a really long read. It's a 40-minute article, or it's a 6-episode podcast series that I can highly recommend because it really it opened my eyes to how much we don't know about that aspect of slave history. And the archaeologists that she speaks to and that the work she's involved in is really obviously it's quite moving, but you don't realize how little we know about that aspect. We know about slave ships that docked in the Americas, but we don't necessarily understand the experiences of those who were enslaved or those who didn't make it to their destination. Not a pool article, but definitely one of the most significant articles I read in that particular week. And I should talk a little bit about how I do how I decide what articles to post on our Facebook page. So every single day to my email, I get 2 different emails from Google. One is the news alerts for swimming pool. That's the search term. And then the other news alert I get is for drowning. And so every few days I skim through the results that come through via that email. Sometimes it's really obvious to me what I'm going to post about. Something jumps right out at me as a topic that's new or different or something I haven't read before. I've had these Google alerts coming to my inbox for 4 or 5 years now. And even prior to that, I would consider myself really widely read in terms of industry publications, talking to other aquatic facilities, often even getting in trouble with my boss when I was a municipal aquatic manager for reading or not looking busy at work. But for me, I've always had a really curious mind. I love to read, and I think there's valuable context in the industry, definitely now as I'm a consultant, in knowing what's going on in different parts of the industry and whether something is happening in your community or community 500 miles away or 5,000 miles away. It is all interconnected, And so going back to my original point, I read these articles that are relevant in terms of new or different or trending or increasing in importance. But then I'm also familiar with a lot of headlines that I choose not to read or choose not to post. And often what I'm not posting is there's a lot of celebrity tours of mansions. There's a lot of resharing of celebrity social media posts, Victoria and David Beckham in their backyard pool. And then there's a lot of poorly written filler content from different magazines and websites, more clickbait, best sunscreens for summer. Most of that I ignore, but I do keep a finger on the pulse of what's being posted about. And often I will also post things that are nowhere near on the pulse. And so this article I can highly recommend, whether you are a scuba diver or not, but somebody who is interested in water and the impact it has on our culture and our history and the ways in which that we have moved around the world as a people through migration that included things like slavery. Just a really, really wonderful article. And the journalist really did the proper work, if that makes sense. Sometimes a journalist will dive into a topic for a couple weeks and then be done with it. This individual actually spent time, years, doing their open water dives. They had to get 30 open water dives before they could be trained as a maritime archaeologist. And so really, just really, really wonderful information that I can recommend. Let's move on to something that is more pool related, and this is more of a fun article. This is from the Brussels Times, and it was posted on June 25th, 2022. Sometimes I don't see an article right away, so we did post this on our Facebook page July 3rd to July 9th. And the headline is 298 people set swimming pool bomb world record in Ghent. So the title is exactly what it sounds like. The Guinness Book of World Records certified the largest cannonball in a swimming pool, 298 people jumping in simultaneously at this pool in Ghent, Belgium. If you go to the website and you look at the photo, it's really interesting to consider the coordination that's required to get 298 people to line up around the perimeter of the pool and then jump in simultaneously. So I'm not usually a fan of world records, but this one is a lighthearted one that I can get behind, as opposed to the other ones that are concerning to me, like breath holding and underwater swimming and total time, continuous swimming. So this is a fun article. I haven't seen anything like this recently. The third article I want to share was a really interesting one, I think, in terms of precedent. The title of this article is State Tells Weehawken to Provide Reasonable Access at Pool for Out-of-Town Residents. And this is posted on a website called tapinto.net, and it refers to Tap Into Hoboken, your neighborhood news online. Hoboken is in New Jersey, and this article was published June 10th, 2022, but again, I didn't get to it until July. Sometimes the news results don't pick up, the Google News alerts don't pick up the content right as it's posted online. It gets embedded into Google and then later it gets pulled into a search. So I'll just read the first couple sentences as they do give us really important context to what this article is about. The state has told Weehawken that it must take steps to provide access for out-of-town residents at the town's new municipal swimming pool. Funded in part through the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's DEP Green Acres program, Weehawken's waterfront swimming spot on Port Imperial Boulevard opened in summer 2021 and has been limited to township residents. So the significance of this article is it's really interesting to me to see a situation where a municipal or a publicly funded facility has actually been caught for having exclusionary practices towards people of other regions. And so for context, a lot of municipalities, so when I say municipality, I mean your local community pool in the town or county or city that you live in, they have a mandate from local government because they receive funding. Whether they receive funding from the city, the county, the state, federally, whether they receive funding as a nonprofit charity like a Boys and Girls Club, whether they receive funding from private membership. The role of the municipal facility is to provide access. Now, within that access, it doesn't have to be totally equal. Often you'll see a situation where there is a different price for non-residents or a registration timeline for people who live outside a certain zone. So in my community of Okotoks, Alberta, there is a specific date on which people can register their kids for swimming lessons and summer camps. And then typically a week later, people who live outside of the community can register, but they don't have the same access because it's prioritized to local residents, the ratepayers, who have paid a portion of their taxes to operate the facility. So all of that to say, it has been my experience as a consultant and people going around to different facilities that there are official policies and then there are sometimes unofficial, often exclusionary policies where a facility or a department head or even a area of the facility will determine that they need to exclude or they want to exclude people who don't live in a certain area. And I'm not here to argue that that's right or wrong because it does depend on the way that the facility is operated in terms of the bylaws that come with the funding and the operational mandate of the organization who run the facility. But it is really interesting to see that a facility that received funding is being publicly noted for not providing access that corresponds to that funding. So skimming down in this article further, while Weehawken officials have said in the past township residents will be given priority when it comes to membership, they also said non-residents would be welcome, though out-of-towners would likely pay a higher amount. So that's in line with what I've described already. However, the township has yet to open the facility up to outsiders, citing decreased parking at the site due to ongoing construction, as well as the increase in the COVID level in Hudson County. So my interpretation of what's going on here is the organization or staff on site are using the COVID-19 pandemic as a convenient excuse. Keep in mind, it is July 2022, and the COVID situation might be different in your area, but speaking generally, we are not at the point we were at in 2020 or 2021 when vaccine access wasn't available, and many facilities were required to limit their usage. 50%, 30%, physical distancing, pre-booking your swim times. We're now in July 2022, and so to say that the pandemic is resulting in the facility not being able to provide access to people outside the community is a bit of a stretch. With no indication the residency requirement will be lifted anytime soon, several Hoboken residents reached out to the county as well as the state to express their disappointment. And so whenever you receive this public funding, you do have accountability to the funding entities to provide that access. So I'm not going to summarize the whole article. I'm going to link to it down below. But the reason I'm sharing it with you is I think it's really important to consider how is your facility accountable to the funding models that help to run it. It may be as simple as, yes, we do everything that we're supposed to. We have our doors open to everyone that we're supposed to, but it may be the case that you do not. So the fourth article I want to talk about this week is from the Toronto Star. Title of this article is "The City of Toronto Lifeguards Pay Under Review Amid Staff Shortages That Has Cancelled Swim Lessons." So this article was published on June 24th, 2022. We posted it on our Facebook page the week of July 3rd to July 9th. So if you are anybody in the aquatic industry, you know that we are at a critical shortage of staff right now, whether that is lifeguards, swim instructors, pool operators. We've had 2 years of pool closures because of the COVID-19 pandemic. That has created a downward pressure on the labor market in terms of employees or individuals being able to choose where they want to work, to choose the best employment situation for them. And that has caused many people to leave aquatics permanently. Over the last 2.5 years, I spoke to a lot of aquatic industry professionals who would say things like, I didn't I don't work in the aquatics industry to tell people to follow the rules or to get yelled at regarding masking or vaccine policies. It's a high stress environment. It's no longer the environment that I love to work in. All of this to say there has been a real shortage of lifeguards and swim instructors. And one of the solutions, in my opinion, that has been really slow for communities to take notice of as a potential solution is the most obvious one, in my opinion, which is increasing wages. We saw this summer a number of organizations create hiring bonuses or hiring incentives, incentives to join the organization, and then completion incentives at the end of the summer. But fundamentally, in my opinion, we're going to have to see a shift in the industry where organizations are more willing to reconsider their wages and what that means in terms of the interest that people have in holding those positions, such as lifeguard and swim instructor. So speaking from my own experience, when I first moved to Alberta about 10 years ago, when the oil industry was very, very successful and there was a shortage of labor, it was really easy for the kids in the small northern town where I lived to go and flip burgers for $25 an hour. This was back in 2013. They could easily make $25 an hour at a fast food restaurant or pumping gas at the gas station or even as a store clerk, relatively low-skill jobs, because there was a demand for their labor and there was the opportunity cost to the business of not having their, pizza shop or gas station open. At that time, I was struggling to get lifeguards at my community pool, and we couldn't come up initially. It was really hard to get people to do the training. Why would you do 20 hours, 40 hours, 60 hours, 80 hours of training to become a lifeguard or a swim instructor that's unpaid potentially if you don't need to? And so I was lucky enough or unlucky enough to experience that crunch 10 years ago in my management career. But I think now we're starting to see a lot of organizations grapple with that now in 2022, when we came out of the Great Resignation. A lot of people left their jobs. And the tie-in here is the City of Toronto is the largest city in Canada, and they used to have competitive wages, but they haven't for a while. So reading from the top, Toronto is reviewing what it pays city lifeguards after their union said below standard wages are contributing to an aquatics staff shortage that has canceled lessons for 1,140 swimmers. So that's actually not a large number, in my opinion, when we're talking about the city of Toronto, which has a population of over 3 million. So earlier in 2022, there was an article that went viral regarding pools in British Columbia that canceled a significant number of swimming lessons. I believe it was 50 or 60,000 spots. It was a huge viral moment.
Courtney So has 2 young boys. She says for the past 2 years, she's been unable to get her 5-year-old into swimming classes.
You find the class that you want and you're like, oh, it says waitlist already. Like, it's 9:01. Okay. Everything was just like gone before I knew what had happened. And there I was sitting there just in tears.
But for those of us working in the aquatics industry, that's not entirely surprising, because a municipality might have 15,000 spots for swimming lessons in the course of a semester. So if we're talking September to December, where there are swimming lessons offered, let's say, after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturday mornings, and there's multiple instructors working and different levels offered, that could easily ramp up to thousands of lessons if you have multiple pools in your city. So coming back to the byline, the City of Toronto is reviewing wages. QP Local 79 has for years pushed the city to boost pay for lifeguards and swim instructors, given the responsibilities and qualifications demanded. This has often been the argument from those of us within the industry. As I mentioned earlier, you have a 16-year-old or a 25-year-old, but they have taken hundreds of hours of training, baseline training to become a lifeguard, baseline training to become a swim instructor, ongoing professional development through in-service staff training, as well as on-the-job training, as well as hands-on experience. And yet we pay these positions minimum wage. as well as the hazardous environment where it's hot, wet, humid, slippery. There's risk of injury from kids when you're teaching lessons, risk of injury from chemicals when you're doing pool operations. I know I'm preaching to the converted masses, but we all know that there's a lot of challenges when it comes to lifeguarding and swim instructors. And so the key piece for me is that a major municipality in Canada is recognizing that the wage structure does need to be under review. And the thing to keep in mind too that is commented in this article is that the City of Toronto is in the Greater Toronto Area, Southwestern Ontario, and there are a lot of other municipalities in that area. Places like Mississauga, Oakville, Vaughan, St. Catharines. They even go down so far as to compare to lifeguard pay in New York State, which is a few hours away, Buffalo, Rochester area. And so it's significant to notice that they're realizing that within the City of Toronto, which is paying, currently the Toronto pays lifeguards $17.21 per hour. That is a Canadian dollar, while swim instructors get $17.80 per hour. But the article notes that that has not kept pace with inflation, and the hourly wage was $14.55 in 2011. And I can speak to that personally because I did work in pools in the Toronto area up to 2011. And I would say that my last wage in Toronto as a swim instructor was $15. And so there hasn't been significant change if they were paying $15 in 2011. And it's now 11 years later, and they're only paying $3.20 more. So the whole article, I will link to it, have a look. Nothing that it majorly reinvents the wheel if you have been keeping an eye on this issue in the industry. But I did think it was noticeable that the City of Toronto has recognized that there is a problem that they need to address and that they're going to look at it. Last two articles I want to mention here in terms of stories that were trending the week of July 3rd to July 9th. This is an article from CTV News. The title is Daughter of Toronto Blue Jays Coach Killed in Terrible Accident While Tubing in the US. This was published on July 4th, 2022. This was a terrible tragedy in the United States. A daughter of one of the coaches associated with the Toronto Blue Jays baseball team was on holiday in the US, was boating on a lake, was tubing. You know, a tube is being towed behind a powerboat. And there was a freak circumstance that resulted in the tube being disconnected and then the boat ending up on top of the individual who was in the water. And she was killed as a result of her injuries. The main thing I wanted to bring into this article is that there's not a lot of information available, and I'm in no way critical of this horrible scenario that resulted in somebody's death. And it was a real tragedy because it would have been tragic for the boat operator, would have been tragic for the family, tragic for the victim. But the one comment I did want to make that I speak to generally is we often, when we go to stores like Costco or Walmart or Canadian Tire and we're buying life jackets, there is a tendency for the adult life jackets to be in muted colors like black or brown or navy blue or emerald green, whereas kids' life jackets come in very bright colors like yellow and red, orange. And so I think it's important more generally that we have a conversation about people don't want to wear bright colors as adults because they want to get great photos or they don't want to, they want it to match their bathing suit. And I don't know what happened in this particular instance, but I do think it's worth commenting that in general, when we're boating, we should think about the visibility of any equipment that we're wearing or using and selecting those colors that may not make the best photo or may not make the best video, but do enhance our safety in terms of increasing visibility in a setting like a lake or an ocean where the water can be quite dark, quite turbulent, and it can potentially prevent some of these tragic incidents. Last article I'm going to talk about for this week is an entrapment. This is an article from krdo.com. Title is Child Thanks Firefighters for Saving Him After Being Freed from Pool Jet. This was posted on June 26th of 2022. And essentially, if you look at the photo, you can see where the pool has been damaged in order to open it up and release the child who was trapped. The 5-year-old who got his hand stuck in the pool earlier this week got to meet the firefighters who saved him. 5-year-old Leon Johnston and his family thanked the Chapel Hill and Franklin firefighters for saving Leon's life.